Welcome to Stags in Media with SGHB. I'm your host, Sophia Gabriella Haber Brock. In this series, I'm sitting down with inspiring Fairfield alumni who have found success in their careers within the media industry. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with current line producer at Bloomberg, Luigi DiMeglio, class of 2014. Luigi has previously been a producer at Fox News, a line producer at Cheddar News, and an executive producer at FinTech TV. At Fairfield, he was a major in English with a concentration in journalism and minor in creative writing, and he was a managing editor of the Fairfield Mirror newspaper, involved with the Ham channel, which was Fairfield's student TV channel, and a tour guide. So thank you for joining me. I'm so glad that you're here. We actually got to meet last week at Bloomberg, which was so amazing that you gave us a tour, and the media advisory board got to come there along with some students, which was really nice. But it's so nice to have you on campus and see you again and get to podcast with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here. This is a brand new media center, so it's cool to see how things are growing and changing since I've been here.
Yeah, it's so crazy that you haven't seen any of this, and it was so different when you were a student here. So it's crazy to see the growth at Fairfield, definitely. But it was so great to see your office. If anyone watching gets a chance to go to Bloomberg, it's like an insane, amazing office, so modern, and I could say so much about it. It was such a great experience. Me and the other students were obsessing over it for days, but
that's great to hear.
Yeah, it was great, and it was a great tour too. You just really explained what you do there, and we really got to get a taste of what life at Bloomberg is like.
I like to think my Fairfield tour guiding experience helped build that out so you guys could have a good time. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. And also, that was part of my experience that actually led to me working there eventually. When I was a senior at Fairfield, I was lucky enough to go on a tour at Bloomberg headquarters in New York. That building very much still the same from what it was then, and very impressive. And I was like, well, as soon as I can get the chance to share that with anyone else who's looking to get into the media industry, I should definitely pay that forward. So really happy that we're able to come full circle on that.
Can you explain what Bloomberg is, what is a line producer, and how does it work being a line producer at Bloomberg?
Loaded questions.
I know.
So I'll do my best. Basically, Bloomberg is, the way I think about it, is one of the original, maybe OG fintech companies. As a financial technology company, they provide services, right, infrastructure to their clients that allows their clients access to markets data. And the earliest iteration of that back in I want to say it was 1981, it was the early 80s, was access to bond prices, right? So that was something that previously you might have had people at big banks, bond traders, calling each other back and forth or communicating however they did about what the price was at any given day or moment. And then with the advent of the internet, Mike Bloomberg goes, wait, what if we put this in an internet type system, and then anyone who buys this device, which they called the Bloomberg, would have access to all the bond market data. And then that kind of expanded into stocks and then into other things like, we'll say, legal filings or news that breaks that pertains to certain companies. So that's kind of where I come in, right? There's that whole fintech part of the company, and then there's the news division, which helps build breaking news and scoops that go into the terminal so our clients can get access to that information before anyone else, theoretically. And then the two kind of feed each other, right? You can really build out really great news coverage based on the data that you have access to within the terminal. So I always thought that those kind of halves of the company feeding each other created a really interesting dynamic, and I do use that every day. And I guess I should get to the other part of your question about what do I do every day? So I produce a show called Bloomberg Markets that's on at noon, Monday through Friday. I also work on some other shows depending on how the schedule is shaking out. As you can imagine, election happened 2 weeks ago, so I was doing a lot of election coverage. But the long and short of it is, every day we come in and we go, what's happening right now, and how can we show our viewers what's happening in markets and cover it in a way that provides context and insights from experts or reporters who are covering these topics. So if my show has space for 6 guests, for example, who's going to go first and how much time are they going to get? Excuse me, and who goes second and who goes third and what's at the bottom of the show. And all of that kind of depends on how long it might take to really process the information that's associated with a certain topic and what kind of guest we have. Did they fly in to be on our show? Or is it a reporter who we see every week at least once, right? That kind of goes into that decision making. So as a line producer, I'm going, all right, we're going to do 7 minutes with this person. Maybe they're the CEO of a company and their earnings came out this morning. And we're going to talk to that CEO about those earnings. Maybe it's 9 minutes, whatever it may be. And this reporter is going to talk to us about something else. And that'll be at such and such a time. And we'll talk to them for 4 minutes or 3 minutes, depending on what it is. And then in the control room, I'm kind of keeping the control room and the anchor honest about those times. So I'm giving them time cues like, hey, 5 more minutes here, 4 more minutes there. Or, hey, let's ask about this. Or, hey, we have this chart, right? Because we are a data company too. And we could pull up terminal charts. And we go, hey, we have record of stock performance over the past 5 years. That actually applies a lot these days because when you look 5 years back, you kind of see end of 2019 going into COVID era and the recovery since. That applies to a lot of companies. So anyway, that's the shortest I could come up with.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's so interesting to see what it's like to work in news. I feel like that's such an important job, and just the behind the scenes of it, it's like a lot goes into making a show. What aspect of your job do you think you like the most? Like, you went into a lot. What do you think you like the most about, specifically being a line producer at Bloomberg too?
I think the resources alone can be enough for me to just end there with my answer. We have literally thousands of journalists all around the world. Many work in my building. Many are in countries and bureaus, again, all over the world. So we can call up someone to cover anything. And in the terminal also, we have access to news publications from around the world and translation functions and accessibility. So, if something happens in Finland tomorrow, or lately Ukraine, for example, we might have someone who's been specializing in that and can give us the latest with that kind of local context and that amount of storytelling. So having that is just incredible. And then, it's a great vibe. People are very nice. There's a lot to learn, and everyone there understands that. I've only been there for not even 4 months. So it's been
very new.
It's been a learning dense period of time. But that's a good thing, and it means I'm not bored, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's cool. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it seems like even just walking into the office, you could tell it's like, wow, it's incredible. But yeah, it's really cool to hear like how global of a company it is, and like the resources. Like, how different is that from your past work experience? I know I listed a few. Like, what is Bloomberg? What is that like compared to some of your other work experiences, like the global aspect?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you brought that up. The audience that you are producing for defines your work a lot of the time, right? So, for example, the Bloomberg audience typically monitors global markets. So, and I've always just personally loved world news. My parents, like, my mom was born in Costa Rica, and whenever we'd go there, I'd be watching like the news with my grandparents, and I was like, wow, I never see what's happening in Honduras when I'm in Connecticut, and my dad's parents, they got Italian language newspapers delivered to their door, and they'd be watching Italian news broadcasts at night. Most of the time, it was like, what's the Pope doing? But anyway, I thought it was interesting local news. So you bring
cool.
that.
It was ingrained in you at a very young age.
For sure. And then fast forward to now, the audience that we produce for is, again, usually people who are leading companies, or they're money managers, or they work in businesses that do have a lot of exposure globally. So those stories are pertinent to them, and they are curious about it, and they appreciate the coverage that we provide. And I think we are uniquely positioned to provide that coverage because we are coming from the finance angle right?
Definitely.
And just within the journalism world, that is a pretty small community, I think, compared to the broader news sphere that we all kind of think of. And in reference to that, I used to work at Fox News.
Yeah.
It's a very different audience. That's kind of like anybody in the U.S. who's waking up and kind of has the TV on as they're getting ready for work. They're probably going to watch Fox and Friends.
Yeah.
Or half of them will. The other half will be watching GMA and whatever else.
Yeah.
But there's a large population that's watching Fox and Friends every morning. So you're covering very American-centric topics. Culturally, you should be aware that a lot of your audience is not just in New York City or on Wall Street, but they're on, I guess, quote unquote, Main Street, so to speak, and they might be in Ohio or Iowa or Montana or Texas, Florida, wherever it may be. So you want to provide them with coverage that they're going to find interesting, and also build new things to gather them around a new fire that they could appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see the difference in their audiences. Like, they're very distinct, and like they both serve to a very, not niche, but like a very specific audience. Like they know their brand and their audience as well, which it's really cool to work for two very prominent companies like that, I'm sure. And I just finished my internship at Fox, so it's cool. We got to chat a little bit at Bloomberg about this, but like comparing the two and those ideas of the differences, which, yeah, it's really fascinating. And I also,
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's cool. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear about your current job in Bloomberg, and especially you've only been there for such a short time. It's cool that you're learning so much, and you've already taken so much away, and acknowledge how cool of a company it is. But I want to kind of backtrack now and talk about your experience at Fairfield. Can you kind of take me from Fairfield to your current position now? Like, what did your trajectory take you on through media?
I think as a first-generation college student, I didn't really know how exactly to navigate the transition from college student to like graduated adult professional.
Yeah. Which is very relatable.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of students go through that. But there were a couple of key moments that really helped me while I was at Fairfield, prepare for that transition. And maybe I was more ready than I even thought I was. I did a job shadow when I was I want to say junior, maybe a senior, but maybe it was like spring semester of junior year. And there was an alumna in near Hartford who was working for a news station up there. Shout out to Tracy Fury, who was an executive producer of investigative reporting up there. So I hopped in a car with her and her photographer or cameraman, and we went knocking on a door because there was a story to be produced. She was trying to interview a neighbor of someone who might have recently had something go on at their house. I really don't remember what the story was at this point, but I remember being with Tracy for the duration of her day. We started early, and we went through the entire process of like, okay, here's the pitch meeting, and here's what we're going to pursue, and let's see what shakes out. And, it took a lot of work, but that was the first memory I have of being with someone who was like a TV journalist while I was in college. And then another experience was I was lucky enough to intern at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. So that was in itself a whole thing. That was like commuting to the city and putting on a show. I was in 3 days a week. And there were a lot of really great moments of just seeing people. It was a comedy show, but it was very serious business, and seeing people just kind of at the top of their game and seeing an organization kind of operate as a well-oiled machine was something that was very inspiring to me. And then just really after I graduated, it was just like applying everywhere I thought I could, and then even calling people I had met. And I had gone to random things just to try and meet people. And by chance, I actually went to this event with my dad, and there was someone there who was a Fox News contributor at the time, and he handed me his card after I had told him that I was studying journalism. I called that guy up 5 months later, and I was interviewing at Fox the next week, and then I was working at Fox the week after that, and that was actually 10 years ago, probably this week.
Oh, wow.
So we're at the decade mark of my
wow.
work.
That's so full circle again. That's so cool.
Yeah, I know. So maybe I'll come back in another 10 years, and we'll see what's happened.
Yeah, and it's cool to hear like the power of networking too, like just being able to talk to people and take you places, which is so cool.
Absolutely. And then, as you mentioned in the intro, like I worked on the Mirror and I cared about that. And I think that was a great experience as well. And I know you do work with the Rear View here, which sounds like a bit of a rivalry.
Yeah, a little bit.
I don't know much about that.
Yeah, I mean, the Mirror is like also, of course, it has the history, and that's like the Fairfield Mirror. The Rear View is kind of merging into modern media, so we're fully digital and focused on more video stuff, trying to kind of revive the ham channel in a way, but in a different way.
Okay. Are you saying it's a dusty mirror? Are you throwing shade right now?
No, it's not dusty. I think there is a lot of, I think it's very important to have tradition, but it's also like merging into modernity at the same time, because keep up with the times. So there has to be a good balance between both.
That's fair. Very diplomatic of you.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, but it's great to hear like the origin story of your first job experiences. Those are your actual like tangible job experiences, but when did your passion for like news and media start? I know you mentioned with your parents watching like news when you were young, like the local news, but was that where it started, or where did the passion start?
Yeah, I would say just my childhood. Growing up, like news was on in the house. I remember watching like the first strikes on Iraq, and like going into 5th grade the next day, and the teacher kind of sitting us down and being very serious, and kind of asking the class, now does everyone know what happened last night? And I was like, oh yeah, we bombed Baghdad. Yeah, I was like, we're talking about this in my house all the time, and that wasn't the case across the board.
Yeah.
So there was a spectrum. Some students very much knew what was going on. Some other students were like, oh, really? So you could put me in that category of always being, very closely following the news. And it's something that I've enjoyed doing. I have a theory that a lot of students pursue careers that they've had exposure to, which I think makes a lot of sense, right? And that's part of why I like to stay involved, because there were jobs that I know of now that I didn't know when I was a student. And I just think the most exposure that you can get as you're learning can maybe help you chart that course, or at least have certain ambitions to land those roles. If you don't know they exist, how are you going to kind of chart your course in that direction?
Yeah, definitely. And did your parents approve of you wanting to go into news? Was that like a good job track in their eyes, or what did they think about it?
Yeah, they were like, go ahead, follow your dreams, do that.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I'm thankful for that. I think dreams can evolve over time too, and that's always something that they've continued to be supportive of, and is the idea of like, hey, don't be afraid to learn more or try new things. And that's part of my story. Even after Fox, was I went to work at a startup, which was Cheddar News. And they were supportive. My wife at the time was supportive. She was, and her and I met at Fairfield, by the way. And she was like, yeah, try this new thing. So I did, and I went to Cheddar News. And unfortunately, you may have read headlines in the following year or so after I started there about them having layoffs and downsizing. I left before a lot of that happened, but the writing was kind of on the wall. And so from there, I went to another startup that was even smaller. And again, support from my family going, hey, give it a shot. Maybe this will be something. And at the very least, you'll learn a lot. And I have. So part of my understanding of what Bloomberg does and all that is also from the experience of those business news startups that I worked at before. Because at those places, they're a lot younger. They weren't this like storied, decades old fintech company, right? So I started realizing what they didn't have. And so when I got to a point where I was interviewing and getting ready for a new role at Bloomberg, I had that amount of context too, of going, okay, this is really cool that in-house, you do have all these reporters and you do have all this information.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's cool to see. Like, it's really nice to see like the support your parents had too, because I feel like it's very relevant for young people to have, like, it's kind of makes or breaks your career trajectory, like what your foundational home, if they support you or not, like if they were like, oh no, you shouldn't go into news, you should do something else or go into finance or something. Or, I mean, you kind of did go into finance a little bit with finance news.
Kind of.
Or be a doctor or something like that. I mean, but yeah, and it's cool to hear that you've had experience at smaller companies too, like working at really small and then really huge. Like that must be nice to have like a full understanding of how companies work in general, which is a really nice balance.
I think so. It definitely gives an added level of appreciation.
Yeah, definitely. And has your passion for news stayed with you throughout this, like your whole career journey so far, or had there been times of like, oh, this isn't for me, or I don't really like this, or has it really rang true the entire time?
It's a great question. I've tried to shake it. I just can't really help it.
Really?
There's too much going on. It's interesting. I feel like I'm learning all the time. So I still really enjoy it. Just as a Fairfield alum, right? I remember being here and having these values celebrated, right? Like examen, right? You're just kind of like reflecting on yourself, right? There's the statue of Ignatius in front of the chapel. Is like two versions of himself. That's something that I hardcore embraced. Like I'm always re-examining, reflecting, thinking like, am I doing the right thing? And maybe this is unhealthy, but I do it, and that's just the reality.
Yeah.
So of course I'm rethinking my career. Of course I'm rethinking these decisions that I've made. But the reality is I'm excited about what I do. So that tells me that I'm in the right place, at least for now. If that were to change, I'm not afraid of that circumstance changing, but it hasn't yet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really nice that you like reflect. I feel like that is a good quality, especially I feel like a lot of Fairfield people can relate to that because that is so built in like the culture here and like the Jesuit values and having to take different classes outside your major and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's really cool that you reflect. Going back to Fairfield, what were some of your favorite memories? I know you shared about working in media, which was great for you. Like, what were some of your overall favorite memories looking back?
What can I share on this podcast? Because Clam Jam was really great.
Yeah.
But for the value of the listener.
Yeah. Wait, was that a school sanctioned thing? It wasn't. Okay. Because now they took that over. I don't know if you know that, but Fairfield, they took it over as like their own.
We had some of the last hurrahs, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe in tradition, as we were saying.
Yeah.
The Mirror, Clam Jam, Mock Wedding, those are all really core parts of the Fairfield identity, in my opinion. But maybe I'm just old-fashioned. But I will say I really enjoyed my time here again at the Mirror, especially just when you have a deadline and you have to get something done and you have to work with a group of people, that is what your career ultimately is going to be like.
Yeah.
Most of the time. It's a team effort, and your problem solving, your decision making. And at some point, you cannot agonize over decisions anymore. It just has to go.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a great experience. I loved that. I also just worked with a group of people who were pretty cool. And then I socially just enjoy the people that I met here. I consider myself really lucky that in New York City, there are a bunch of people who are my roommates and people who I have been friends with, and we still see each other all the time. Like my roommate from here, like walked my dog the other day because my wife and I couldn't go home, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I got it." Like, you know what I mean? Like that's a Fairfield relationship that I don't think everyone is lucky enough to enjoy. If they are, that's great, but I'm super appreciative of things like that. I also enjoyed just being able to, like you said, like take different classes and kind of explore, see what I liked and didn't like. I think I took one political science course, and I was like, like I like covering this, but I don't know if I want to be in this full time.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
definitely.
Like I thought the policy, I was just like, I don't know if I want to live in the policy. I like learning about the policy at a certain level, but things like that.
Yeah.
If anything, I wish I had taken even more totally random classes that didn't have anything to do with my major.
Yeah.
If I, knowing what I know now, I would go back and take like an economics class or two, or maybe a finance class or accounting or something, because now I'm in a type of journalism that is focused on like a company's balance sheet, right? Or their earnings report. So,
yeah, it's interesting you never took a class like that here, even though that's like your whole life now, working in finance. Well, like I said, in news and finance, but
covering finance.
Covering.
So it's, that's another thing that I guess I would take away. It's not really a Fairfield experience, but there's a lot of learning to be had even after you leave here. So having that appetite here kind of gets you in that mode. And if you just keep that up after you graduate, I think that's a great thing to do. And in fact, it might be hugely to your detriment if you do not do that. If you stagnate, then it's not great.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, what is some words of wisdom or best advice you can give to students, given your experience, especially to Fairfield students?
You know what? Don't be surprised if you see people who you saw here at companies you'll work at later or on the street later. In the case of New York City, I see people all the time who I saw on campus.
Really?
Yeah, just by chance sometimes.
Small world.
Yeah, it happens like that. Don't be surprised if you end up working at a job that years ago you would have thought, oh, I'm not sure how I feel about that job description. And then you do it. And then, oh, wow, this is actually really cool. For example, for a while, when I was at Fox, I was not really aiming to be a line producer because I worked on a show where that just wasn't the role within the show that really appealed to me. And then when I started working in business news, I started liking that role more. Maybe my thinking just evolved. So don't be surprised if your thinking evolves, and don't let your assumptions limit you, I would say. That might not be very Fairfield specific, but I will say it doesn't hurt to meet as many people as you can while you're here. Don't let your assumptions limit you in that way either. There are a lot of people on this campus. Some of them have a big presence. Some of them kind of just go about their day. Meet everybody. I think that's really a thing that I'm happy to have tried to do. None of us are going to be able to do it to the fullest extent possible, but keep that in mind.
Yeah. That's definitely words of wisdom. Thank you. That's I'm sure and just hearing your story too, it's really inspiring. I'm sure a lot of students can take away great things. So, I mean, we could talk about so much. We only have so much time, but thank you for sharing your story. And like I said, it's so great to have you and listen to your insight and stuff. So, yeah.
No, it's great to be here. And for what it's worth, I think this is a really cool podcast idea. I don't know how entertaining of a guest I am, but
totally, it's great.
I think as a student, I would have liked to learn more about how exactly life goes.
Yeah.
So hopefully I was able to provide at least a little bit of insight into that.
Totally, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.